Olá, esse é o Poder Entrevista. Eu sou Paulo Silva Pinto, editor sênior do Poder360.
E eu sou Mariana Haubert, repórter do Poder360. Vamos entrevistar o advogado Tom Goodhead, de 42 anos, CEO do escritório Pogust Goodhead de Londres. O escritório Pogust Goodhead defende as vítimas do rompimento da barragem da mineradora Samarco, em Mariana, ocorrida em 2015 na Justiça do Reino Unido. Tom Goodhead, thank you for joining us for this interview.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Agradeço também a todos os web espectadores que assistem este programa. Esta entrevista está sendo gravada no estúdio do Poder360 em Brasília, em 10 de setembro de 2024.
Para ficar sempre bem informado, inscreva-se no canal do Poder360, ative as notificações e não perca nenhuma informação relevante. A partir de agora, a entrevista será em inglês. Tom Goodhead, I started this interview by asking, why will the case be judged in the United Kingdom if it is already in the Brazilian courts?
Yes, so this case isn't in the Brazilian courts. This case is a unique case because over 600,000 individual Brazilian citizens, as well as 46 municipalities, tens of thousands of members of traditional and quilombola communities, they have directly processed against BHP. And that's the BHP Australia and BHP United Kingdom. In Brazil, a case has been brought, in fact, tens of thousands of cases have been brought in Brazil, but the main case which has been brought in Brazil has been brought by the federal public prosecutors against the companies, but it hasn't been brought by the victims. And so this case in England is quite unique in terms of its size, and it's the victims directly processing and asserting their rights against BHP.
How many clients you have in this case?
So in the action at the moment, there are around 620,000 individuals. This is a case in England, and then there's separately a case related against Vale in the Netherlands with about another 70,000 individuals.
That's you too?
That's us as well, yes. And BHP and Vale have agreed to share the liability between them in relation to both the case in England and in the case in the Netherlands. So there's somewhere close to 700,000 victims bringing the cases in Europe, as well as 46 municipalities, Brazilian municipalities from the states of Minas Gerais, Espírito Santo and Bahia, as well as thousands of companies, small companies right the way to big companies, members of indigenous communities, churches, or basically I describe it as like, you know, a sort of a medium-sized city, the number of people who and institutions who are bringing this case.
And your clients are the people affected, or municipalities? How
both, yes. So both the people impacted as well as the municipalities.
And how did you gather all these people together?
So I first came to Brazil 7 years ago, actually, almost to this day, when I was approached by a lawyer from Rio de Janeiro who was representing thousands of fishermen. And those fishermen were trying to receive indemnities from the Renova Foundation, which was the foundation that was created as a result of an agreement in 2016, the TTAC. And that foundation was supposed to provide full redress and remedies to the people that were impacted, including the fishermen. This lawyer that I was working with then said that his clients weren't receiving fair indemnities or any indemnities from the Renova Foundation, and he had experience of taking litigation overseas, being able to process against companies, for example, in the United States. And so he approached me and said, look, you know, I know you do cases where you act on behalf of the victims. Is it possible to bring this case?
Was it, the first time you first heard about this case?
I'd seen it on the news, you know, like everyone. Obviously, it was very well reported internationally, but I'd never come to Brazil before. I didn't have detail about the case, but I spoke with him. I visited his offices in Rio in September 2017. And you know, we kept talking about the case and seeing whether it would be possible to bring something. And so originally it would just be for his clients that we were planning on bringing it. But I came back to Brazil a couple of times in 2018, And I started speaking to other lawyers. I met lawyers through people in local OABs that had that approached me. And when I visited Mariana and I visited cities like Governador de Valadares and other cities that have been impacted, Colatina, I heard the same story hundreds and hundreds of times. I represent clients, so the lawyers would say, look, I have 100 clients, I have 500 clients. They're not receiving indemnities from Renova in time or fairly. Can my clients join the lawsuit? And then, so as we carried on doing that, then the news of the ability to be able to proceed overseas became quite wide. And then we had to sort of work with local lawyers and others to set up almost what we call these walk-in centres, sort of quite large centres where people could come and register in order to participate in the lawsuit. And the same with mayors. When we were in a particular city and I'm meeting with lawyers there, one of the lawyers would say, "Oh, come, please come and explain this to the mayor." And these are small communities very often. They're not big cities like Brasília or São Paulo. They're Governador de Valadares is probably the biggest, but they're cities of 10,000 people, 20,000 people, different municipalities. And so, I would end up meeting the mayor and explaining what this process in England would be about. And then, within a period of about 4 months in 2018, I think over 200,000 people joined the lawsuit to begin with in 2018 in about 25 municipalities. And for me, that was always, I never expected that many people would join. We thought it would be a much smaller lawsuit, but it reflected, I think, the inability of the companies to have delivered a fair reparation. That's why the lawsuit started.
But you worked with all these local lawyers, and how did you get the signatures of hundreds of thousands of people?
Yeah.
How did you manage to get all of them? It was working with these local lawyers only, or going directly to the people?
So you would work with all of the clients in the process in England also have a lawyer in Brazil. And so we would be working with those Brazilian lawyers. Many of them already represented a large number of people, but of course we had to obtain special powers of attorney to bring the claim in England. So we would work with those lawyers, and they would sometimes hire interns, or they would hire staff to be working alongside them. And also some of the lawyers that we worked with would be responsible for quite a large region. So we have what we call coordinators. So we'd have Brazilian lawyers that would be responsible for the region in Mariana, or the Governador de Valadares, or Colatina, or Linhares, these other communities. And then they would build structures within their offices. So for example, a lawyer in Governador de Valadares said, look, I need to hire 20 interns from the local university, and they would bring in other lawyers from within those communities in order to help them. And then there are photographs of lines of people for hundreds of meters that were trying to sign and to join the case with their POAs. But generally we would always be, because of course most people don't conceive of bringing a lawsuit overseas, so we would sit and we would talk with the lawyers in the local OABs and explain what this process was.
Did you have your team had an active role in terms of searching mayors, to asking them to join your case? Or
no, generally it would come passively. It would be we had Brazilian lawyers. So the way that the case started was with one Brazilian lawyer, and then that became 5, and then that became 50. And one of the things that
how many in total?
And in certain cities like in Governador de Valadares, hundreds and hundreds of lawyers just from there. But one thing I've experienced about Brazil for 7+ years is word travels very quickly, right? Everybody has a WhatsApp of somebody else, and then they're communicating. So obviously you have to be very careful, because as a lawyer you can't, despite what the companies may accuse us of, you can't practice predatory lawyering or just say, hey, come and join the lawsuit and advertising. But what you are allowed to do is educate, and you are able to explain the practice of law. So we would, for example, just we would host an event at the local university, or we would hold something at a community organisation, and we would just explain about the lawsuit, and then explain how a process in England works. And then if somebody wants to come and participate, and we did the same sometimes with the municipalities. So someone would say, hey, the mayor would like to, because people in their municipality are joining. So they want to know what it is that they're participating in.
And all those people, your clients, they are identified by their social security numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper of people's powers of attorney, and then you would take a photograph of people that they would hold up an ID card, or they would be sometimes as the case progressed, then people would also be able to inscribe to a case online, so they have to provide their CPF, etc. then.
And how can they pay for the service? I mean, how does this part work?
So they don't pay anything. It's what in England we call no win, no fee. I don't know how that's translates into Portuguese, but basically, if the case is successful, then generally I think in Portuguese you'd call it custos or your honorarios. How we as lawyers make our living is to recover fees from the defendant if they're condemned, or if they make a settlement. Or sometimes additionally to charge a percentage of what the sum recovered from the victim. So, for example, in the Mariana case, for the indigenous that we work for, we don't charge anything. My law firm acts pro bono. For municipalities, we charge 20%. For individuals, we charge up to 30%. For some businesses, 20%, and so that's how we as a law firm get paid if the case is successful. But behind us, because the company that we're against, BHP, is the largest mining company in the world, right? They basically have, not far off, unlimited resources to be able to litigate. And one of the struggles is, how as a victim, how do you have the same kind of power to be able to litigate against the largest company in the world? And so we use what we call litigation finance, which the companies call them fundos abutres, I think, vulture funds, or advogados abutres, and of course vulture lawyers trying to feed off of the victims, etc. But the reality is that without that type of funding, it's impossible to bring these cases, because BHP, for example, have told us in London that in defending this case, they will spend over £100 million, which is what, 750 million reais, something around that, 800 million reais, just on lawyers. And London is probably the most expensive place to litigate in the world. It's probably worse than the US. And so, what the companies call the vulture funds, we on our side, representing the victims, we actually see that they facilitate access to justice. They're able to provide us, my law firm, with the finance to be able to fight the case.
How much they paid you for?
So they basically charge us. It's public. I describe it as like a credit card rate. They charge us about 20% per year, basically. So I take a loan. It's my law firm. The victims don't have any relationship with the fund. I take a loan. I personally actually sign for the loan, and we borrow money in order to then litigate against the companies, and then the companies receive their repayment out of my fees. So if the case is successful, I mentioned 30% that we might charge for individuals, or for 20% for municipalities, etc. I have to repay the funders out of the money that I receive, effectively.
And if you don't win, you don't pay them.
If you lose the case, then the victims don't pay anything. I still have to pay them out of other cases that I fight, because my office has got probably 30 plus different cases in Brazil. It's not just the Mariana case. We do the Braskem case, Brumadinho, La Isha, the Cutrali, other cases that we do. And so the way that the funding works is, because the funding is to the office, not just to the individual client. If one case fails, you still have to pay them back from the other cases. They're basically making a bet, right? They're betting on the outcome of the cases. They have confidence in the case, and they have confidence in the law firm in bringing the cases forward.
And for this specific case, how much did they lend to you?
So it's public already. They financed $552.5 million. That's one of the funds, and then others have funded tens and tens of millions more. That's not directly just to Mariana. The 552 financed all of the cases that the office does. But if this case continues for another 2-3 years, they will have financed $250-300 million by that point. Even at the moment, I'm sure we will have spent more than $150 million on the case. So it's very, very expensive litigation to fight.
But the fee for the clients is up to 30%,
Correct.
or it can go upper?
It can never go higher than that. So the highest is ever 30%. What I've done in cases that we have, my office has settled a number of high-profile cases in the United Kingdom over the past few years, cases against Volkswagen, cases against Uber, cases against British Airways, cases against UEFA over the Champions League. In all of those cases where we've settled, we have never taken a percentage out of the client's damages. We've negotiated with the company. You said, okay, you pay the victims their compensation, and then you have to negotiate with us, the law firm, in relation to our fees. And that's the way that we've always structured the settlements. But if we ever ended up taking anything, deducting anything from the victim's damages, the maximum is 30%.
And how much is the total? If you win, how much companies will pay for clients?
So it's impossible at the moment to say, because the court would have to decide ultimately, right? What the amounts would be. We had that our clients have all filled in questionnaires where they say how much they lost. Anything. How much did you fish per year? What has happened to your property, etc. They declare values. And you also then have moral damages, which are for someone that lived in Governor de Valadares and then they didn't have access to water for a certain number of days, what they should receive at that time. And the calculations that we had done, we made that public previously in February 2023. I think it was that it could be as high as £36 billion, plus interest, plus inflation. Now, that doesn't mean that's what you will get in court, because the victims still have to prove their losses. So, it might not be anywhere near that much. It would depend upon what the victims are actually able to prove. But by any measure, it's billions and billions, right? This is not a small case. There's talk in Brazil at the moment. I've seen newspaper articles even while I've been here this week about the companies maybe making a deal for 100 billion reais of new money in relation to a settlement of the claim which has been brought here by the federal public prosecutors, and the claim on behalf of the victims is no different from that. We're talking large amounts of money, but in the context of the profits that these companies make, in the context of the market capitalization of BHP or Vale, their revenues, actually these are sums which are only fair, in my view, to actually redress the harms that they've done from the Mariana disaster.
What's the maximum you were asking?
I mean, the maximum was back in February 2023, as we put it then. It was 36 billion plus interest and plus inflation. So look,
which it would be. Do you have this calculation?
It could be 60, 70 billion pounds at that point. Okay. That's the market capitalization of Vale. Now, realistically, do I think that the court in England is going to condemn them for 60, 70 billion pounds? I don't think so, right? And the reason being is that you have to prove just if you say, well, you owe me this, you have to go and prove it. So some people might not be able to prove that's what they've lost. But we've done a lot of work on those figures. We've been analysing them. We've worked with one of the world's largest forensic accountancy firms, and by any standard, this is a very, very, very substantial case.
Mm-hmm. And if you, from whatever you win in this case, your clients receive, what will be your percentage of the total? Because of course it varies.
So it makes a difference between whether it's negotiated or whether it's something which is judged in court. If it's negotiated, then that's a negotiation between the companies and between my office, what they're willing to pay and what we're willing to accept. So that's a negotiation. If it goes to court, then it depends what stage of the proceedings that you get to. The earlier the settlement, very often perhaps the percentages are lower than those that I described earlier of the 30%, etc. But the maximum that would be ever would be is 30% for the individuals, 20% for the municipalities. But I mean, by way of example, if it went to court and the court adjudged and said, look, this is 10 billion or 15 billion, 20 billion. Theoretically, we could be entitled to 30% of that which the individuals receive or 20% of that which the municipalities receive. But my experience of doing these cases, I've been practicing law for 14 years. I've settled some of the largest class actions on behalf of individuals that there have been in the UK over the past 5-6 years. it is almost unheard of for one of these cases to go to a final decision on the merits, on how much the companies have to pay. The companies generally at a certain time will settle the case, just like they're negotiating with the federal government here now and the institutions of justice to try to resolve that. And why do they do that? They do that because these cases can present an existential crisis to a company. You've seen in the United States there are claims against people that have sold opioids, the addictive drugs in relation to painkillers. There have been claims against tobacco companies. There are claims against people with asbestos for manufacturers of different drugs. Generally, at a certain point, the companies settle because the company have got shareholders. They've got obligations to their shareholders, and they don't want to enter into a bankruptcy. And so, my optimism, my hope, is that at a certain stage, the shareholders of BHP and Vale and the boards of directors of BHP and Vale will say, well, look, it makes sense to try to reach a resolution here, which means that we preserve the value in the company, because whilst BHP is a huge company and whilst Vale is a huge company, sums of money of tens of billions of pounds, dollars, that is something which poses substantial risk to the financial health of those companies and can cause shareholder value to be destroyed. And I think the longer and longer and longer they wait, actually in many ways the more damage that they're causing to the health of those companies. Both BHP and Vale have been sued by shareholders in relation to the Mariana Dam disaster. Vale has been sued in relation to Brumadinho by its shareholders. We've seen other examples of large companies, Petrobras being sued in the Netherlands at the moment. And so, when I talk to the victims, they say to me, well, why aren't the companies trying to make a resolution now?
And how can the British justice check all the evidences that the victims are sharing with you and with the justice? How can they see if it's all correct and all true?
Well, the British justice is very experienced in dealing with international cases. So, London is one of the world's capitals of commerce, right? We've got one of the largest financial sectors in the world. Lots of people from all around the world. In fact, over 50% of the cases which are determined in London are by people from outside of the UK bringing cases against each other, from all over the Middle East, all over Asia, people from Latin America, and in fact, all over the world litigating in London. And so the judges there, I think, are some of the most sophisticated and some of the most experienced in determining cases around the world. And they've also had many experiences of dealing with cases from overseas. So, for example, they've environmental disasters from Peru, from Colombia, from South Africa, from that have been judged from Zambia, that have been dealt with in courts in England before, from Côte d'Ivoire. So the courts are quite used to dealing with these types of issues, and they also recognise the social realities of the situation. So unlike a bank which has records of everything, an informal fisherman I use the example of Colachina or Linares, an informal fisherman there may not have the records in the same way. And so courts are used to being able to develop mechanisms in order to seek to achieve justice in those types of cases.
And how the trials that are being happening here in Brazil can affect this trial in London?
Yeah, so in Brazil there are there's the main case, the one that everyone talks about, the 155 billion ACP brought by the federal public prosecutors. And as I mentioned earlier, a settlement of that case may have some impact on the litigation in England, because the settlement of that case may provide for mechanisms for people that they may be able to adhere to receive some benefits, and the companies may seek to force people to sign a release agreement in order to do so. But there are also tens of thousands of individual cases, brought in small claims courts in Brazil, other types of ACPs. But at the moment, most of those are stopped. There's not really very much happening in those cases because of the focus on the main claim that the federal public prosecutors have brought. So, in answer to your question, not very much, to be honest. There's unlikely to be much impact on it.
When is the trial in London beginning?
So the trial begins on the 21st of October, so just over 1 month.
And for how long it will last?
Yeah, so it's scheduled to last for 11 or 12 weeks. So it should be finishing, because of course we've got the break for Christmas as well, but it should be finishing sometime in February next year.
And will there be a result in terms of a number, a figure of...
So not a figure. This first trial only deals to condemn the companies to pay.
Okay.
So their liability, because as crazy as it sounds, BHP still deny and they don't accept that they are liable to pay in England. And so they defend that first. If the victims are successful, as we expect they will be, then next year they would be seeking a payment of what we call interim damages, so an amount to say, look, we were successful, we want to be paid this amount now, as well as also then in 2026 a determination probably of a late 2026 of how much it is that they would be paid. But the wheels of justice move slowly, unfortunately. You know, even the English courts, which traditionally have been quite efficient, this case has taken 6 years just to get to this stage. But that's reflective of what the companies have done. You know, rather than trying to make a resolution when this case was brought and said, look, you know, we're sorry, we want to try and make a fair outcome with the victims. 6 years on, they're still fighting. They're denying liability in London. They're launching things like the Abraham claim here in Brazil, which BHP actually, you know, just paid the mining association Abraham to bring, and ADPF and the STF. They've done everything that they can to try to frustrate justice.
So if companies are condemned, how long it will take to finish all that?
So if they're condemned next year, then, as I said, the victims would then seek, we have a procedure in England for what we call an interim payment of damages. So they would seek monies next year to say, okay, well, you owe me this amount, but you must pay me something now. So they would seek that next year. But in terms of resolving the entirety of the case, it could conceivably still take another 2-3 years, even after next year. So this is one of the most difficult things with the Mariana case. The scale and the size of it is so difficult. You know, it could be the end of 2027, early 2028, before everything is done. But the reality, as I said earlier, is that nearly all of these very large cases, because interest is running, inflation is running, the companies want to try and make a resolution, the shareholders want them to make a resolution before it gets to a final condemnation of how much they have to pay, you know, and all of the appeals, etc.
And one more argument stated by the companies being sued in this case is that the case hurts the sovereignty of Brazil.
Yeah.
What do you think about this?
I always find that a very funny argument, to be honest, and tragic, because BHP is an Anglo-Australian company, right? So the world's largest mining company that comes to Brazil has made billions and billions and billions of dollars of revenue as a result of their ownership in 50% of Samarco, and also has, you know, operations in Peru and has operations in Chile, and so it's quite happy to extract the mineral wealth from countries in Latin America. Yet when it comes to actually holding them accountable, and Brazilian municipalities go to court in England to hold BHP accountable where BHP was headquartered, then they suddenly say, oh, Brazilian, you know, sovereignty, we don't want to be attacked. This should all be resolved in Brazil. Everything that the companies do is to try to pay less in relation to their damages from this case, right? It's to limit their exposure. The municipalities taking action to bring a case outside of Brazil poses a risk to the companies, and so the companies are using the rhetoric of sovereignty and using this in order to try to frustrate the attempts of those municipalities to try to obtain justice. And you know, we found countless examples previously of Brazilian states and Brazilian municipalities litigating overseas. So, for example, the states of Rio de Janeiro, the states of Bahia, Maranhão, Sao Paulo, they've all litigated cases overseas before. In fact, they've sued the tobacco companies, we found, in the early 2000s. This ADPF is brought 3 months before the trial. It was obviously a naked attempt by the companies to frustrate justice. This wasn't something where they've got a real concern about a fundamental constitutional precept. We found the minutes, the lawyers from one of the Brazilian firms we work with found the minutes of Abraham online demonstrating that this case was brought by BHP. They encouraged Abraham to do it. They offered to pay 6 million reais. And I have every confidence that the STF here is going to see that this is basically just an attempt by BHP to frustrate justice. And so, you know, the irony of an Anglo-Australian company trying to shroud themselves in Brazilian sovereignty, I don't think is lost on me, and it's not lost on the victims.
So some 3,000 lawyers that you were working with in Brazil, you're paying them. It's all you're paying them, right?
Most of them don't get paid by us as we carry on. Some lawyers, our litigation funders that work with us, we pay them for their services because they analyse matters under Brazilian law in the case, or they provide expertise to us. Most of them, they have powers of attorney with their own clients, or they all have powers of attorney with their own clients. And then if the case is successful in England, we will pay some of our fees to those lawyers. So basically, for example, we could charge up to 30% of the client's damages. And then if the case is successful, 6%, so 6 out of the 100 goes to the Brazilian lawyer directly.
All right. You said you have about 30 cases right now. Are they all like this one of Mariana?
No, there's a different range. So in England, we settled, for example, quite a large case a couple of weeks ago against Johnson & Johnson and other very large pharmaceutical companies over what we call transvaginal mesh, which was a product that was a defective product that was supplied to women. And so we brought that case. In Brazil, we are, or rather overseas, but on behalf of Brazilian victims, we're bringing cases against TÜV, who is the company that certified the safety of the Brumadinho Dam, and so we're processing against them in Germany. We're acting in the Netherlands on behalf of the victims of Braskem and what has happened, obviously, in Maceió. We're also acting in London on behalf of thousands of orange growers in the state of Sao Paulo against the estate of José Luis Cutrali over a cartel that was being operated between orange juice producers. So we're bringing cases like that. We're bringing a case on behalf of 35,000 people in Peru against Repsol, the Spanish oil company, over an oil spill that happened in a refinery called La Pampania nearly 2 years ago. And then in England, we're bringing cases against car manufacturers over sort of what we call the dirty diesels. If you remember the Volkswagen scandal, where basically all of the car manufacturers have done the same thing. So the cases that we bring are always on behalf of consumers or victims of environmental disasters, or sometimes on behalf of small businesses like the orange growers. But generally, we're fighting against big companies.
Okay, how many cases in Brazil right now?
So in Brazil, we've got the BHP case, the Brumadinho case, the Braskem case, Norsk Hydro, the orange juice cartel case, and the Isha Brazil case. So we're doing 6 cases deriving from Brazil at the moment.
From a total of 30 cases?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so it's like
about 20%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it the biggest percentage of
So because the Mariana case is so huge, probably about half of the work that my office does is just dedicated on the Mariana case. But the other cases, things like the Braskem case are still big cases as well. So even though they're only 20% of the cases by number, probably in terms of the work we do, probably about 60 or 70% of it relates to Brazil.
Do you think if you win, there will be other cases involving Brazil because of the success? Yeah,
I mean, I'm approached every single week. We have Brazilian lawyers that email us or contact us on LinkedIn or meet at congresses, and they say, hey, a multinational company, and they might come from, Piauí, or they might come from Goiânia or Pará, or anywhere around Brazil. And they say there are multinational companies that have done bad things in my state, and very often historic things where it's that there's been events of pollution, for example, for decades and decades and decades, or there have been cartels that foreign transnational corporations have been involved in, or there have been bribery or corruption scandals that foreign companies have been involved in. And I think the Mariana case certainly might set a precedent of the ability of victims who feel the consequences of the powers of sort of just uncontrolled capitalism wrought. We live in a globalized world inevitably, but the ability to seek redress in the countries where those companies are headquartered, because obviously it's a struggle, isn't it, for all countries in the world, how we regulate companies. And I think even a good example of that is Twitter X at the moment, right? Obviously I know there's controversy over it, but when it came to trying to to serve a process on Twitter here in Brazil, there was no one here to serve it on. You know, Elon Musk wasn't here, he hadn't nominated management here, and I think that's quite a good example of just how multinational companies are able to structure themselves in a way that can make it difficult for people to seek to affect legal controls or legal order over them. So it's sort of inevitable in a way that multinationals, people will have to go after them in the countries where they're domiciled sometimes in order to seek to achieve whatever legal outcome that you're looking for.
So is there anything else you want to tell us about this process or this trial there that we didn't ask you?
Just the final thing I would say is that for the victims that I represent and meet, nobody has ever been held criminally responsible for this disaster. Nearly 9 years on. There has never been a big contested trial where people have heard the evidence, being BHP executives being asked questions in a box. They haven't heard emails being written out. They haven't seen the evidences that show that decisions were being made by executives both at BHP and Vale and at Samarco to prioritise profits over safety. And so for many of them, what I hope is that this trial will provide a form of justice, a form of catharsis. It's not going to be people aren't going to be go to jail over it. It's not going to be a criminal conviction, but it's an ability in order to examine what went wrong. And so, I do hope that irrespective, put aside the victims want compensation. Of course they do, but cases like this should never be necessary. Obviously Mariana happened and then Brumadinho in January 2019. I know there's been a CPI over Braskem, and I've visited Maceió a number of times myself, trying to see how these things happen. So if anything, I hope that maybe this case and the court, forensically analysing what happened, maybe serves a purpose in terms of stopping disasters like this from happening in the future.
How many cities did you visit in Brazil? How many trips?
I've been 60 plus times to Brazil. Even during the pandemic, I was coming and isolating and then trying to see people, because the nature of the communities that we represent. I represent communities in Pará, in all over Brazil, in rural Minas Gerais, rural Espírito Santo, Bahia. They're not easy places to go to, and as you're aware, not everybody is able to just join a Teams call and talk with us. You have to go to those communities and you have to visit the people that you represent. But for me, that's been, to be honest, the most enjoyable part of doing this case, because it's one thing to be in Brasilia or in Sao Paulo or in Rio, but the opportunity to work directly with the impacted people, that's a privilege of a lifetime for me. As a lawyer, it's the best work that you can ever do.
Então, Goodhead, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Agradeço também a todos os web espectadores que assistiram este programa. Essa entrevista foi gravada no estúdio do Poder 360 em Brasília, em 10 de setembro de 2024.
Para ficar sempre bem informado, inscreva-se no canal do Poder 360, ative as notificações e não perca nenhuma informação relevante. Muito obrigada e até a próxima.
Poder Monitor, a ferramenta mais completa para monitorar os 3 poderes. Acesse agora poder.cc/monitor e ganhe 30 dias grátis.